Hello, this is Darren Pulsifer, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, creating a generative AI policy with returning guest, Jeremy Harris. All right, Jeremy, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a couple years since you've been on, right?
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it's been a little while.
Yeah, last time you were sitting at our dining room table.
That's right.
Yeah, this time, even though you could come down, Jeremy's my neighbor, by the way. We decided to do it this way. We'll see if it works.
Well, I figured this would be more along the lines of all of the other people who you get to interview. So I feel like I'm actually qualified to be here on your show instead of just hanging out at your house. So.
Yeah, that's true. Last time we had to, put our snacks away in the card game we were playing before we did it. So.
Right. Yeah. It makes it a little easier, a little more professional, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Just so people know, Jeremy, you're a lawyer. Specifically, you practice privacy law in the healthcare industry. And this crazy thing happened about, 9 months ago? No, longer than that now. We're in October, almost 10 months ago. Generative AI was kind of born.
Yeah. I will say this, because I am a lawyer and because I work for the company I work for, I have to give you that standard disclaimer that all of the opinions are mine and nothing is reflecting on my company, et cetera. But a lot of people took note of generative AI, and a lot of companies are cashing in, especially on the healthcare industry. I mean, it's blossomed. Google has a whole AI large language model actually based for healthcare. It's a big industry and it's a big issue. And
that's really interesting because it's not been around long, but it's moving super fast.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons I think we've been chatting, over the last months about this is, I think, when I look at AI, I think it's a little different, and I know a lot of your audience will just sit here and go, "Oh, the lawyer's going to explain this to us," but from the layperson standpoint, right? From my not really a layperson anymore, from the legal side, when I look at it, I think it's a little bit different than the other technology we've used before. The other technologies we use, you have a pen or a pencil, and then you're going to go to a typewriter, which is a little faster. You have a typewriter, and then you're going to go to a computer, which is a little faster. So each of these tools allowed for some efficiency, right, in the use and the method. But the generation, right, the creation process was really fundamentally the same behind it all. It just made it a little bit more efficient to get it out. So I think what we're seeing here, and why I think generative AI, and I might slip up and just call it AI at some point, but I think this idea is a little fundamentally different because I think it takes the patterns and the processes and puts them together. So I see it as actually not really a tool that we use to make things more efficient. It can, but I think it's really how we interact with a set of systems. So it's a little bit different, I think, on how we utilize the tool rather than just, this is going to make this, this monotonous project a little bit more easy to manage. It actually can create and kind of start developing some things. So I think that's why it creates all sorts of anxiety for a lot of people, including me.
Well, I bet, because you're right. It's in the name, generative. It means to generate.
Right. Just the basics. And I know what I say is pretty fundamental, but I think that's the point where we start, right there, when we keep talking about, how all of your guests, and I've watched a lot of your episodes and I've seen people come in and talk about what AI can do and what it can and all of these cool things, So I followed over the past little while. And while I'm not an expert on the technology side of it, what I do look at is what the C-suite's looking at, what the operators are looking at. How are they utilizing it, or how are they thinking about it even? And I think that's our fundamental starting point is we really need to get a literacy across the entity, right? Whatever entity you're in. Right. So if it's, Intel, if it's, my company, Sutter Health, if it's whatever, you really do have to start getting a floor, and people have to be somewhat conversant with what generative AI is and what it's not. And I think until you get to that point, it's like using email. Well, it's more intuitive to know what it is because, again, it's just a simple tool. But I think generative AI creates a little bit of a barrier without a common understanding. So that's where I'd say, look, we got to start there.
Well, all right. So this is a big problem, though, because people are already using Chat GPT, Bard, Bing search. I mean, it's readily available.
Yeah.
And I talked to Laura Torres Nui about this in her classes, and she's teaching how to use it and how to use it effectively and all this, because everyone's already using it. She's already, as an English professor, she told us in a previous episode that she can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's out.
Right.
So you got to come up with some kind of policy quick, right? Otherwise, what do you do?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what I see is there's a couple of policies that I've seen, and I'll use a nameless child, for example, one of my own. Over the summer, they may or may not have had to write a paper on a book. So they read the book. During the process of creating a report, an AI consultant was used. I don't know. I think it was ChatGPT. But what happened in the case of this particular school was they said, yeah, we've detected some anomalies on how it's written, and we think he might have been using generative AI. And, my child, being the stress case that he can be, he fessed up and said, yeah, I did, because I knew I was in a time crunch and blah, and he took responsibility for it. But it's an interesting policy, right? The no tolerance policy. We don't use it. We don't agree with it. We don't accept it. That's one way to approach it. And a lot of schools are approaching it that way. So I use that as kind of the very, I don't agree, by the way. I don't agree with that process. And I mean, obviously it's my opinion, but even in a school setting, I agree kind of with what Laura would say. And you got to figure out a way to teach it. You got to figure out a way to embrace it, just like we do any innovation. When companies embraced email, they were just more efficient. When they embraced the internet, they were more efficient. Those who caught on early are the ones who had a lot of success. So what I see here from a policy perspective overall is you can ignore it. You can actually not just ignore it, but you can actually say, I mean, the ignore part is a different subject, but you can actually say, no, we don't use it. We're not going to use it. But I think you're right. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. So you're going to have a problem from the very beginning because it already became a consumer issue, right? It's already out there, and it's hard to say, hey, you can't ever use it or see it or look at it. It's just there.
So what are the concerns, right, on that organizations have with using it? Because that's the big question. I mean,
Sure.
In the medical field, why not use an AI? Why? What are the ramifications of using it that organizations are worried about? What are those?
Well, I can say right now that over all of the industries, you're going to have overlapping concerns, right?
Right.
Not just specific to healthcare. I mean, healthcare has its own little nuances as well.
Well, because the privacy laws in healthcare are very
right. I mean, and how about autonomous driving, right? Auto manufacturers will have a similar, hey, what privacy things do we have here? How much data do we want to collect? I mean, there's all sorts of interesting applications across the industry. But I think in general, if you're looking at kind of some generalities, I think what I've been seeing and my colleagues that I talk to have been worried about range anywhere from the privacy regulations, and that there's a proliferation of state-specific privacy laws, what you can and can't. They're usually very consumer focused. The consumer can request that the data be deleted from whatever data.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah, and so those are some concerns, right? How can I comply with a regulation that says I can delete data when I really can't delete the data? It's in the model, right? I mean, I've already used it to train, and I think there's some privacy concerns as well with whether or not that data, whether it's health information, defined by HIPAA as PHI, or electronic health information, EHI, whatever acronym you want to use today. or it's personally identifiable information, which is normally how the state laws are identifying either personal information or PII, personally identifiable information. If it's something like that, how are you going to input that and not expect that input to be further disclosed or used? So there's some privacy concerns just in the overall approach to how it's done or how it's managed. So I think that gives rise to, that's why you have to be very clear with everybody on board, at least to, I would say, I mean, they don't have to be 100% up to speed on it, but they got to be like 30%, right? I mean, they got to have a fundamental idea of what it is. And when I say, LLM in the law, that's like a master's of law. That's another year certificate degree. But when I say LLM to any, AI centric, that becomes a whole different discussion there. And it's like, oh, well, which language model are you using? And how does it learn? How has it been trained? What biases are implied because of its training? So there's another concern that we have is how the AI model even works in the first place. What's the input? What's the algorithm? What's the training gone
what data
into
train it, right? All those sorts of things.
Right, because all the data that gets in is being used to create and predict, right, future outputs. I mean, that's very simplified.
There was an interesting article that I reported on my Embracing Digital This Week newscast, and it was that generative AI in healthcare could cause underrepresented groups, underrepresented individuals to be misdiagnosed because their data hasn't been in the training models.
Right.
That's bias. That bias is a big deal.
Right. So your health equity type of movements that are going on right now is to assure that you have different, races, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds.
Yeah.
All of those considerations, all those factors are input into the healthcare model to get to some sort of data set that represents how healthcare is being delivered and how effective that delivery is to outcomes. It's tricky because you also have autonomy, right? I mean, every patient who's, let's say, just use a random category. Let's take me. I'll use me. I'm a white, fairly affluent male in California. Okay, well, what does that mean for me? Well, my data is much, much different than my neighbor who happens to be from India originally. And their data is input into the health system a little bit differently and not tracked the same. It's not ever been collected in that way. So if I go to the doctor, I'm getting the benefit of a model that perhaps is trained on me. But my neighbor with different proclivities or different background is not going to have that same because they're getting a model based on me. And they might be, they might be from Bombay or Bangladesh or whatever it is out, and they have a different marker. They have different inputs. So it's really interesting to see from the bias standpoint. That's definitely true. And I know Google came out with their MedPalm, I believe is what they call their AI or their LLM for healthcare. And I know that Mayo Clinic, for instance, is using that in terms of how they're looking at creating notes, creating diagnoses, and looking at medication interactions, all of these things. And it's being built into the system, which I embrace. I mean, I'm with you. I like the title of your series, Embracing It. You have to. There's no way that the healthcare system is going to be isolated from AI or generative AI.
Yeah, but with all these concerns, though, I could see where a healthcare organization, or not even just healthcare, we could look at it in the military or government. They're like going, there's too much risk involved here.
Sure.
Right? And there's too much risk and liability and all those things. So why even go there?
Well, I think that's a crucial point of beginning to go down the route of do we or don't we use it? Everyone, once they're up to speed and have some sort of baseline and knowing what it is, then they got to say, okay, how is it effective or helpful to our product or our business line? Right? You have to go through it because let's say in healthcare, you can go into subsets, right? So you have the actual provision of healthcare and that doctor patient nurse interaction where you're actually in person with somebody, or like this on a video chat or whatever it is, but you're in person, you have that communication, and based on the knowledge and training of a healthcare professional, you're getting a diagnosis or treatment plan, referrals, etc. Well, how about claims? Right. You get billed for those visits. How about claims and which ones are approved by insurance or which ones aren't? I mean, there are a lot of other administrative functions that the healthcare industry could use it without having a lot of concerns about the biases that go into it. I mean, there really are. I can tell you right now, I mean, we haven't even started to talk about the risk. I can list out, you have regulatory requirements either on the privacy or information security. You have cybersecurity issues with, okay, who's actually hosting this AI, right?
Yeah, where did it come from?
Where is it? Where's it going? Who's using it? Who has access to it? You have a lot of contracts. What happens if you actually don't want to have a vendor of yours use AI without at least telling you or have written approval? You have to throw that into your contract. You have to start changing a lot of how you do business just on a fundamental level. Your interactions with your contractors becomes different. You have risk with liability, like you were mentioning. If the AI generates something, is the AI liable, or are we as the company liable? I know the Federal Circuit, so the DC Circuit Court, so a U.S. Federal Circuit Court has now said that AI, whatever, generative AI, whoever owns it or runs it, cannot be deemed to be an author or a inventor.
Yeah, I saw that. In fact, I reported on that as well on my weekly newscast.
So what does that mean for you, right? What does that mean for anybody in any industry? How you have to start looking at all of your processes and going down and saying, hey, let's look at having a policy about AI. And we've talked, and I know that your entity has had several different policies. My entity is creating policy and trying to figure out what to do with it. I've talked to others who have something very generic. I have others who have decided to ignore it and not have a policy at all. And they've told me that they're like, yeah, we just don't do it. I'm like, well, you are doing it,
Right,
and if you do it,
whether you have a policy or not, it's being used.
Right, I guarantee you do a little search on your own networks, and I guarantee your employees have done it during work with work in mind, right? So how do you deal with that as a risk, and how do you recognize? Well, one, you have to recognize the risks that are out there, right? So all of these different things you have, can we use it? Is it beneficial? Which business lines are we going to use it more versus less? How do we integrate it into the systems that we have and build it with privacy and security in mind, right? Using those privacy by design or security by design principles, and include this as one of those systems that you can utilize. So you got
one trend I'm starting to see. There's the really super large LLMs like ChatGPT-4 and Bard and all those.
Right.
But I'm also seeing the emergence of what I call community Gen AI and private Gen AI, where I can take models that were generalized and trained and then train them on my own data. And that's not getting loose. That's not getting outside of my own walls. Does that help alleviate a lot of the risk around privacy if I'm running it myself now?
Yeah, it does. LLMs come with risk no matter what, whether they're to be private or not. I mean, they may perpetuate that bias, right? They may even spread misinformation, right? I mean, that level of creativity, or I think
they call it the hallucinations.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That hallucination and that fog, whatever you want to call it. I've heard a couple of different terms. Whatever you set that level for creativity, I'll just kind of identify it that way, right? The generative part of this. You have to be very careful because it could actually just create something that's completely false.
That is true.
And it's not malicious. It's just is what it is. It's part of the model, right? You're generating something. So I think,
but you have control over that.
Right. Once you have a private, especially in that private, with a localized or a specific industry specific or a company specific or a product specific type of LLM, right? Depending on how broad or how narrow you tailor this, I think you do counter a lot of the concerns with the bias, within misinformation, with privacy or security breach potentiality. I actually heard one I don't know who was one presenter talk about the potential harm to the environment, even because of the processing power that it creates.
They do consume a lot. Yeah,
I'm like, I mean, maybe that's a consideration that some companies will have more than others.
Yeah.
It just depends on the culture and where you are. So I think having that tailored data for appropriate outputs is completely a strategy that I would embrace wholeheartedly. And that's what like the Google Palm, right? The Palm or MedPalm is.
See, to me, that's a community Gen AI.
It's a community, right? It's a community, and it's a broad community, right? It's anyone who wants to jump in on a electronic health record like system, and they want to create. And what it does is it pairs with your system that you have existing. It runs data through there, and it creates patterns and identifies things. Hey, what are the prescribing patterns? Well, you can use it. Be great. You could use it to identify, hey, is there a diversion problem with this medication? The opioid crisis. How are we doing with all of these prescriptions? Are we prescribing more or less? Are some physicians prescribing over the norm? I mean, you can actually you can do a lot of that, but it can automate this.
Yeah. So the benefits of a community, especially in healthcare, think about it. Healthcare community Gen AI, where all the doctors in the nation have all the records to everything. Could you imagine what that would do? That would improve healthcare across the nation.
Well, and right now, I mean, you have the Office of Health Information, right? ONC. You have the Department of Health and Human Services. You have a lot of entities on the federal side who are actually creating information sharing. I mean, they call it information blocking. Well, it's really anti-information blocking in these regulations.
Yeah, they're breaking down the science.
I'll call it information sharing. And it's openness. You have California coming out with a law last year or 2 years ago now, and it's coming into effect in another year or two, where you're going to have a direct exchange of healthcare information. So almost every provider, some few exceptions, but certainly every hospital and every big provider practice are going to have to share information through this process. Well, how are you going to generate a report or anything from that? You're going to have to automate it somehow. So there's already, with the platforms being envisioned and exactly what you're saying, you can actually utilize AI in a tailored way, right? You can actually have a thoughtful process where you decide what information's put in, how you're going to train it, and aim solely for that, right? Aim for that, so you can weed out a lot of the unintelligible or dangerous type of output that you get. Well, if you create something, again, there's limits, right? Obviously, you can't be ultra. I mean, you'll lose some of the generative part of it as you lock it down more. But I do think you can take some, quote, bad outputs or bad data or bad algorithms to get to a thing where a result where you realize, oh, there's a lot of benefit here that we can actually control, and it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be way more efficient in how you share data across.
There's still the need for a doctor. That's one thing I want to get across to people is these augment and help professionals do their jobs more effectively. And it gives them a way of sharing their knowledge with other people in their same profession. And these community Gen AIs, which I think can't be understated, because we've been doing this sort of thing in the software development world for decades. We share code all the time, right? Now with Gen AI, it's going to be easier for us to share code. Doctors, though, haven't really had a great platform to do that in the past. And with the Gen AI in the middle, helping coordinate and collaborate through all that data, I think ultimately you're going to get better care and push better care all the way out to the edge, where a country doctor can now have all of the help of doctors at the top medical facilities in the world, which is incredible when you think about it.
Yeah, your integration for digital medicine is going to expand. It's going to be, and I think, for example, my CEO will tell anyone who will listen that, that's where we're going, because that's where it is. That's where the future actually is in that digital medicine. The problems that we're going to face are the regulatory frameworks, and the legal side of it is always far behind the actual technology side of it. And this is not new. This has been since the beginning of time. Any type of technology, the law is very slow to come up with a solution or a regulation for it. And that's where I think where you have each company really does need, even if you don't think you're going to use it a lot, you should actually go and look and clearly define the purpose and scope of your AI or generative AI policy, just so you have a starting point. I would recommend, and again, I recommend it to my own client. I recommend it to anybody. You got to go through and define, okay, how are we going to use it? You got to be willing to realize that this is so fast moving. That policy may change every month. It's not one of those one and done type of
a couple times since the
right.
of the year. Yeah.
And as the data sets change, as the ethics around AI evolve, can you use for what? What accountability is there? What privacy guidelines or guardrails do you have? How about attributing AI? When you do something that's using AI, what's the transparency like? Do you have to identify, hey, this report or this was helped by AI? Maybe. I think regulators are looking at that, though. They are very cautious, and they want to make sure that even if you used AI, a couple of the law review articles that I have been reading, actually, I'll give you one example. One, it was just something on LinkedIn. You just start looking around, and one of them, there was a headline that said AI policy. So I'm looking at this going, this is interesting. I've been reading up on this, and they actually ran a prompt through two different AI models, two different language models, and said, hey, write a generative AI use policy for our law firm. And they ran it, and then they posted both policies on there, and they clearly said, look, both of these were used, were generated solely by AI, actually, in that case. But then I've seen some others where they have an article, and it said AI was consulted or used in the generation of this article. But you always have, to get back to your point, you always have that person, at least now, and I don't know that it's ever really going to change. You're going to have somebody to review and look at that, right? You're going to have somebody adopt that generative AI product and ideas as they go through it and say, hey, this is how it applies to us as an entity, as a company, or this is what we want out there. This is the diagnosis, and we agree with the data that went behind it. So yes, this is, they're going to adopt and kind of sign off on that type of thing, I think is the safest way to approach AI at this point.
Well, and some of my other guests have said the same thing, right? You can't fully trust a generative AI because of that creativity aspect. And I've even played around a lot with generative AI, and I asked it, well, where did you get your facts from? Give me some quotes, right? Some references. It made them up. They didn't even exist, right? So we are going to have to use it as a tool, not as replacing me, but as a tool that I have to validate and check, right? Make sure that it's right, but before I use anything that it's generating.
Yeah, no, clearly, and I think that comes a lot with the culture that you engender in your corporate environment, right? In your company, whether it's a school, and you say no, we can't use AI. Okay, everyone knows the rule. I mean, that's a pretty simple rule. If that's the way they want to go, I understand it. I'm not going to fight against it. I get it. But I do think you can harness that technology in a way where, okay, let's teach the ethics behind it. Let's teach how we utilize it. Right. In a way to, okay, now you generated something. You still are the author. You still have to go in and say, no, I actually don't like this. This isn't my voice, right? You have to actually start thinking about it in a critical way. And I think you could actually get a better outcome in some instances with like using the school example. But there's also a whole, I think that leads into the accountability and kind of that responsibility model that even in a corporate environment, you're going to have to get. How are we going to be accountable? Whose role is it in the company to be responsible for the use or the parameters around AI use, right? If you want to come up with an acceptable use policy, you want to call it that in your company. Sounds great to me, because if you're looking at intellectual property issues and trying to, you can't AI can't be used for copyrightable type of issues on its own. But what happens if you create something using AI, you modify it to a point where you can adopt it to be yours, and then it's probably fine, right? So you have to.
There's a lot to think about.
Yeah. There's all sorts of unquestioned or untested legal theories behind any of that, right? I mean, just because you can't be the inventor, AI can't be deemed an inventor. Well, you can use it in an invention. So how does that work, and where's that line? And the answer is that'll still be determined in future cases, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
But even in Northern California, there was a case against OpenAI, just filed in June, and it's a class action suit because they're alleging that it's a privacy violation, because they were scraping social media posts, they were scraping locations and all sorts of data on these individuals, these users of AI, or California consumers, whatever you want to call them. And so there's this case out there about how OpenAI is now violating just fundamental privacy rights. And in California, there happens to be a constitutional right in the state constitution, a right to privacy. And so that creates a little bit, whereas in the federal government, it's not quite so clear that there is a constitutional right to privacy. So there's some room in there for a lot of litigation risks that come with using AI, and not having a parameter, not having rules set up in your company just opens you up to risks that you may not otherwise be open to, even like 6 months ago.
Yeah. I find it interesting as well that you may not even know you're using AI. Mm-hmm. A great thing just happened. I use a tool called Grammarly that checks my mm-hmm. grammar. I've been working on my PhD dissertation for a long time. And I've been using Grammarly. And about 2 months ago, they added Grammarly Go, which is an AI on the back end. Now, I knew that, but a lot of people don't. So all of a sudden, they're using an AI and not even know they're using an AI. Because I'm sure Grammarly sent an email out that say, hey, Grammarly Go uses a generative AI in the back. No one read. No. Right. Because it's in the hundreds of emails I get every day. Mm-hmm. I happen to research it. Not everyone's going to. So there are going to be more and more tools that have generative AI on the back end that are doing things.
Right. I think that lends to the whole discussion about when you institute a new tool, right? You go out and contract with some vendor for a data processing whatever it is. In my world, we contract with a lot of different data companies, right? They work through data in different ways. They analyze data and report back to us and give us things that we then can turn into CMS or whoever it is to get paid. There's a lot of things we do. So there's a lot of data flowing in and out. Well, we wouldn't know whether that entity, right, that vendor is using AI. Yeah. And that's one of the cautions I think going right now is, my reading of the other people's reading of, because, the draft legislation is very tricky to get a hold of in really good form. But the federal legislation, there's all sorts of discussion about who's going to be liable for things, right? Is the AI company going to be liable for things? Well, how does that really pass down the that's a very high level strict liability, right? Wow. So OpenAI is used in a vendor, which that vendor then uses, passes that information on to your company, and you send it to the government. Are you now defrauding there's all sorts of chain reactions that I can think of that there'd be novel legal ideas here that people are going to say, hey, who can we blame for something when it was wrong?
So generative AI has opened up. It's going to keep lawyers busy.
Oh, it definitely will.
Okay, and then, as long as it keeps you guys paid, that's all that
matters. Yeah. I guess the good thing is I don't bill, right? I'm in-house, right, so I don't have to bill. But colleagues that will bill, I'm sure there is a market out there that it's like the new, that new plaintiffs council, right? When they have a new law that goes into effect and you can sue people for more money, they're going to go after, and you'll have all that. Those plaintiffs suing companies. Well, this is the similar type of thing. I'm sure that class action here in Northern California, guess what? It's a class action, meaning as soon as they certify a class, those attorneys are going to be sending out mailers saying, hey, were you affected with this? Come and join our lawsuit. And they're going to try to run that number up. And, I'm not saying that they're doing anything nefarious. I mean, if they, that's a legitimate claim, it's a legitimate claim. But it's certainly going to be a big business, I think, in the legal industry for a long time.
Well, if anything we got from today's episode, there's still more to come around have a policy, anything.
Yeah.
And there's still a lot more to come in this space because there's a lot of unknowns still.
Yeah, no, that's definitely, I mean, I would say establish a policy, walk through things. It's clear.
All right, Jeremy, it's always fun talking to you, but thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem. I liked it. It was fun.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.